In this section, we'll go ahead and cover what is installed on the ground station. We call the ground station basically the remote. So the remote has an Android system that's built into it, and we're using Android to kind of navigate and go through the application. So initially, we have the Explorer app that's actually installed. We'll go through that, kind of talk about some of the features and buttons and settings in there. But first, I want to just show you what the system actually has installed. So we use other things like screen recording, how to move files back and forth on here. So let's just go through that real quick, and then we'll jump right into the app on the Explorer. All right, when we initially open up the application here, we can see that it's populated with the home screen on the Autel Explorer app. But if we go ahead and touch on the screen, or slide up on the screen, we're going to go back here. We see a number of apps that are actually installed on the device itself. So we do have, if you're connected to Wi-Fi, which I believe I've shown in another screen, but we'll go through that real quick. If you click on settings, we have Wi-Fi connections here. So if we need to connect to Wi-Fi, that's where we do that. We have another application here called the ES File Explorer. Anytime we do any screen recordings or want to save files onto the device, we have this actual internal storage or external storage. So again, we can take an SD card and take it from the ship and save it here if we need to, and then from here we can access the file. So that's the ES Explorer app. Let's get back out of that. And lastly is just this X Recorder. On the X Recorder, this is how we'll do any screen recordings. So we'll have a couple buttons here that are available to push and start screen recording and or take pictures of the screen. Again, this is the full screen while running the app. This isn't just the video itself. Remember that is going to come hard from the SD drive or the SD card off of the payload. So we'll cover a little bit more of that in the file handling and whatnot on what comes off of the SD card. So X Recorder for any screen recording that we'll be doing if you needed to screen record the full screen on all telemetry, map data, everything else. So that's what we'll use, or any snapshots. Internally though, you can actually take a picture, we'll cover that as well, but you can take a picture or record a video and still access those. It takes a second to kind of get to them while it's up and flying, but for an example, if we just want to take a quick shot of something, we can review it real quick, and I'll show you that in the app as well. So this is just kind of the overall Android settings. We want to be a little careful installing third-party apps just because we're not sure if the infrastructure and the version of Android is going to handle running some of these. So we want to be a little bit careful on just installing third-party apps and APK apps, but they can be installed. So just to make sure that the infrastructure of the whole thing doesn't fail or crash or anything like that is what is most important. So not recommended to just put third-party on there. Please get a hold of us if you have any questions on installing third-party apps. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at the actual Voyager app. In this version, we're running 0.88 on this version, so I'll show you real quick where to check that to make sure it's the same. Anytime we do any application updates, some features may change. Make sure you check and make the release notes on any firmware update that comes to know what those changes are. But in this version, again, 0.88 is what we're reviewing right now. This is similar to 0.86, so very close to each other, but this is the more recent version. So make sure that you are also on 0.88. So let's go ahead and see where that information is available first before you move on, and then we'll go ahead and kind of take a look at the app. So when we get into the application, we can see here that we have flight interface, manual flight, project list, all of these settings here. So we're going to go right into settings. Click the About screen. And we see the app version right here. So again, just for following along, this particular video will update these as new app versions come out. But just make sure that you are on 8.8 for this instructional video today. So one of the things about the 0.88, the new version, is being able to use this, log into this user center. So if we click on that, we can see here that I have myself logged in, Jay McBride. I can change a couple of things in here, my picture images and stuff like that, but what's important is that we have the flight recordings that are done. That is where we can access that. Come to the settings page, we are only, and this is very important, we're only allowed to share this data when we tell the application to go ahead and share it. So very important to understand that. We don't have any way to get this data automatically. You have to actually give access to the database if we ever upload any information from the application itself. Let's go ahead and hit back. We have the novice guide here. It's just a walkthrough of support videos if they show up here, some instructions, and basically some tutorials and whatnot that would show up here, and that will be accessible as well. The photo album, as we work backwards here, any photos that are stored on when the ship is actually turned on, the photos and videos would be stored here if you saved them. So you can go to the SD card we can see up at the top. The flash storage, which is basically just no SD card, it would be what would be stored on the actual payload. And then whatever you save on the local album. So that's how you would have access to those three. When we go into flight interface here, we'll do that here in just a second, and manual flight, we have the project list. The project list is a number of all of the current missions that I've done. And when we create a mission, let's just go back here real quick. When we create a mission in flight interface, this project list allows us to duplicate, save / modify a little bit. We can also remove them from this list. So that's the project list portion, is being able to pick on a mission and then remove that mission or modify the mission. And we click the edit screen up here. So again, this is the area in which we can modify, change, delete, duplicate any of the missions that were already created. But in order for us to actually create a new mission, we have to go into flight interface. Before we do that though, I'm going to talk about manual flight. And again, we're just kind of working backwards here. So we're going to go into manual flight. First thing I see here is a icon or a window that tells me in order to fly in manual, I have to flip the switch. So up here on the hard switch, I have to actually change it from A to M. That allows me to bypass that window. When the ground station is connected to the Dragonfish here, we have the ability to fly this like a normal drone. So into the corners to start it. We'll kind of go through that again when we go to prepare for flight. But in the manual is 100% manual, exactly that. Not that it flies any different, but in the automated flight pass, it does things a little bit quicker, faster. In manual, if we need to immediately get out to an area or take off and hold and stay in a position where we're controlling the sticks 100% of the time, this is what manual flight is. There's all of your telemetry data is going to come through. You have your camera and video coming through, so all of that's available in manual. But we'll kind of review that when we head out to the field to kind of understand the difference between automated flight and manual flight. All right, so the last one would be flight interface is what we have. In the flight interface, there's a couple of things in order to set up correctly. So we're going to click on this. If we slide our finger back and forth, we can see we have a couple of windows here. So waypoint mission, polygon mission, rectangle mission, and what they call safe assembly. Let's take a look at safe assembly first. And we get a little bit deep in here, but it's actually fairly easy to understand. So also keep in mind that we are not currently connected to the aircraft. So it doesn't populate where the aircraft is. I can go ahead and set up flight missions and plans without that before even heading out to do a mission. But when we get there, turn everything on, we have to make some adjustments. And again, we'll talk about that when we're actually ready to do our flight missions today. So let's go into safe assembly. We can see that the map is trying to populate right here in this area. The only time that the internet needs to do anything, you can see right here, this is where I'm at. Kind of a terrible screen right there while it's trying to populate. But as soon as we pick on an area and save it, and save anything, we can see a geofenced area over here. That's already auto-created currently. One thing to remember is that we don't actually restrict you from flying in geospace areas, but the purpose of safe assembly is to create and make your own geofencing or areas that are going to be issues with your out there flying. For an example, tall buildings, because it doesn't have obstacle avoidance, does have terrain follow, but we don't have obstacle avoidance. So we want to put things on the map that would be very known, like large cell phone towers or any radio towers in your area, also any buildings or even restricted areas that you can't enter. So up here we have Ogden-Hinckley Airport that has already been populated on the map and created for you. If you end up in that zone, you can bypass it when it asks you. You are in a no-fly zone area deemed by the application itself. So you can bypass that, still fly in it, but please use caution when doing so. However, if there's also something we want to take a look at, I have Hill Air Force Base over here that is not on the warning area. I want to go ahead and put a circle around that. So I'm just going to click on the circle here and click on a space. I can increase that radius just a little bit bigger. I just do not want to get anywhere near that airspace. And we can copy this for a exact radius and dimensions for any type of actual controlled airspace area if we wanted to. But for now, I'm just putting a circle around it. I can set a height, tell it's a fly zone. I'm just going to go ahead and label it as HAFB. It's Hill Air Force Base, so I just know what it is. And maybe I'll just make it decrease or increase that radius. So I'm just going to hit save here. You can see that we have a radius, height, everything like that. Effective date, that's another one, or is it always on? So we're going to hit save and save that particular spot. You can do a polygon of the same thing. So if we want to just do a polygon, we can create that to be whatever size we want in a restricted area. And maybe that would be, you can tune this just a little bit more. Keep in mind that the Dragonfish itself, when it comes to get close to one, you're about 500 meters or so away from the getting close to it. It's got to make turns and things like that. So it's not going to come up right to the edge. So just remember that the buffer of where you're putting this no-fly zone, if it comes to encounter that, it's going to keep a pretty good buffer away from it. So if you need to get tighter than that, you might need to make some adjustments on your no-fly zone areas. But the purpose of this, again, is we don't have obstacle avoidance on here, so we have to be very aware of the area in which we're setting up the safe assembly or the non-fly or geo zone. So let's come out here just a little bit farther, and this will be the area of operation I'd like to fly. So if I go ahead and hit another polygon, click out here in the field, make this a little bit bigger. This is my operational space. This is where I want to contain the aircraft. So we'll just save this as op 1. Let's save that, op 1. All right, delete that, op 1. And what we're going to do is go ahead and change this from a no-fly zone to a geofence, and we'll see that the color will change here. So now we have a green area. Again, the location of this, I can create it however I want, the height that I want. So if I only want to go to 400 feet, AGL, I have to set that at 400 feet. You can also see a minimum of 263. That's the safe height of the aircraft to fly. But if I wanted to go ahead and change that to a height in which it can't go any higher than a certain height, then this is where I do that. So an effective date or time, if we're good with that, I go ahead and save it. And this is kind of the area in which, again, when I flight plan, I'll show you where we activate these. So we've added these 3 separate one polygon, one circle around Hill Air Force Base here, and then we had one that's auto-populated at Ogden-Hinckley again. So that's pretty much the safe assembly area. There's not much up here that we're going to end up changing to create no-fly zones. So let's go ahead and take a look at doing some flight missions. So the automated missions are a lot easier to actually set up because a lot of the times people want to go ahead and fly the machine. As mentioned in the manual flying, yes, you can manually fly the aircraft. There's no problem with this. But in initially just trying to get a flight plan ready to go, get the aircraft in the air, We can hit a couple waypoints. That's really, really simple to basically get going. And it's a lot easier to go ahead and turn on dynamic tracking to track things during that flight. We don't have to create a whole 1 hour or 2 hour flight mission, but we do need to create a takeoff point, a landing point, and then obviously it's going to know where to come home if we have any issues on emergencies or disconnections. So let's go ahead and jump into the 3 different flight plans that we have: the rectangle, the polygon, and the waypoint. First one I'll start with is just the polygon. This is very similar to rectangle, so we're just click on polygon here. We can see in our flight mission here, we want to be able to get this downloaded map and kind of get some detail, but I'm just going to go ahead and create a mission over here in this space. If I edit this and add up here on the top right, we're going to add first a mission name. So just call it test. We have a takeoff altitude that's very important to understand. So this would be the transition height in which the aircraft is going to climb to, then transition to forward flight. This we want to make sure as we're looking around or double checking on location that we don't have any trees or obstacles to hit. So minimally, we're at 164. But I usually feel good about setting this to 200 feet if I know I'm on a pretty flat space without any major obstacles like buildings and large structures. So 200 feet to take off. The altitude here, this is our working altitude for any further waypoints or positions in which the aircraft has to stay. Also, if we go into dynamic tracking, it kind of holds at this altitude. So for this one, I'm just going to go ahead and change it to 375. Gives us a buffer up to that 400 AGL. And another thing to remember is that this is 400 AGL from the location in which we are starting the mission. If we have dips and falls, we do have some terrain changes. You're not necessarily always going to be staying at exact 400 AGL. So just remember that. You can turn on terrain follow if it's a lot of change, but just that with the distance that the Dragonfish can fly, we need to be very aware that that AGL can change quite a bit according to the terrain. As we come down, there is a GSD that is populated here, 0.4. This is just calculated off the wide camera. It's not a really, I would tell you right now, it's not a very specific GSD that would get very fine detail on any type of mapping with the current sensors that are available. So I want to be a little careful with this number, but it just gives you an idea. We can set a speed if we want to, but in this case, because it's already kind of set up to preloaded, I can just put it at a dedicated speed. Remember that we're flying in wind, and so it might change a little bit. It might speed up or slow down, and that's totally feasible with an aircraft like this. So side lap ratio, if we know what that is how much side lap we're covering as each pass goes by. And then a front lap is how many pictures we're taking as we're on that flight path. Course angle we can change, and some of the gimbal stuff we can change. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at waypoint mission, just creating a mission. So we'll go ahead and hit waypoint mission here. Now keep in mind that when creating missions here, I don't have the aircraft connected. I have it connected to the internet right now, but I don't have the aircraft connected nor the base station connected, so they're not going to populate on the screen. But today's flight, we're going to go ahead and go down to the field and do today's flight, is going to be in a location that's a little bit farther away here. And we're going to find that location because I'm just going to try to map plan before we get out there to the field. So this is going to be out in this area. We have an RC field that's actually located out here in this area, but I'm going to go ahead and just put a waypoint mission and create that out in this area. So when I start that, we can see, let's zoom in just a little bit. There's the RC field out here. We're going to just run a flight plan over here on the right side. I'm going to go ahead and just click one time in the field, and it will populate basically waypoint number 1. That's the most important thing. Where is the waypoint? I can move that waypoint wherever I want. And a couple of things are showing up here on the map. Let me zoom in just a little bit further. Auto populates a home point, a takeoff and or a descent and ascend circles. So what's important here is, again, to remember, if I'm not connected to the aircraft, it's going to just auto-populate those things, but when we get on location, we're going to have to make some adjustments. So what I just want to make sure I have established is the actual waypoint. So I'm going to move from waypoint to here, another one here. So these are those exact locations. If I wanted to, I can go ahead and search for an address here if I wanted to. So if I wanted to check, I live a lot farther away than this location here, but just to simply do it, I wanted to do 4202 and then check out where that might be. I can find that on the map. So look up an address and I can find an address on a map, and that would create where a location and create a waypoint for it. So just a couple waypoints out here in this field. We can see how the aircraft is likely going to fly the flight plan on waypoints, just going from one to the next. But first I want to go up here and just set some adjustments. So I can see the waypoints. It's the flight plan I want. These are the waypoints I want them to fly to. I'll go ahead and click up on the top right, name this mission, test. I'll just do it 10, just for me able to find it on the list when we get ready to go. We want to go ahead and set up the takeoff transition here. So the takeoff transition is the height in which the aircraft is going to climb to and safely transition. At the lowest, it's going to be 164 feet on automated. Although in manual, we can do that as low as we want. We're very careful with that. However, I'm just going to go ahead and set this number to 200. My working altitude, right here on the top here, that's going to be the altitude of all the waypoints moving forward. I can adjust between each waypoint if I want to, but just the overall working altitude, I'm going to change this to 375 feet AGL. It's fairly flat out in this location, but just keep in mind that, again, 400 feet AGL, it might change a little bit. You can terrain follow with this aircraft. According to DSM, actually the model in which we're using the map from. But just again, to be cautious about on distance, how far it goes, you can have a change of altitude pretty big, substantial on AGL because of that terrain. Speed, I don't normally change here. I just let it decide how fast it wants to go. Camera action, same thing. What I'm wanting it to do is just carry the camera to a location, waypoint number 1, 2, 3, and 4. And from here, I can go ahead and turn on dynamic track and then track something, watch something, observe something. So I don't usually do any actions on the gimbal, but if you wanted to, you can adjust them here. The other thing is clicking onto the home point here. So this is the home point spot. I'm going to click on that. We need one more adjustment here on the landing transition. So this is the altitude in which it's coming in to make that transition. So once she's flying in, she's going to stay at this altitude at which I'm going to set on the height and then come down to this number. If it's 200 when you took off, I usually say 200 when you come back in. So I'll just go ahead and put that 200. And that's just some default numbers for what I set up. Set the UAV as a home point. That's correct. As soon as it sees where it's at, it'll do that. We can see the circle up and circle down here is exactly what I wanted it. So the height, working height will be 374. From descending down to 374, we can increase that radius if we want to, make it bigger, but it's a default number here, so I just let the flight algorithms actually figure that out. But as I mentioned, I can go ahead and adjust a single waypoint for what I want it to do. If I click on that waypoint, I can edit the waypoint. So I can increase the altitude, I can fly over the waypoint, I can orbit the waypoint, so you can see it changed right there. I can increase the radius. I can tell how many times I want it to go. So for example, this is just in the middle is something that I want to observe and look at for just a second before I turn on dynamic tracking. But I can just fly over an area. This would be a holding pattern as well, just somewhere to hold until I actually need to go out to a space and navigate it to that area. We can tell the camera to do stuff, and we can actually adjust the coordinates if we need to. If I didn't get it quite exactly where I wanted to on the map, I can adjust just small adjustments to move the circle around or the waypoint around. If I'm happy with it, I save it, or I can delete it. I can do any of that right there. All right, so any of the adjustments we can do at the waypoints, we're just going to take a look. We can do that as well. If we save the waypoint, we then are pretty much done with the flight planning. We're going to go ahead and save it. This is the mission I want to fly, the location I want to fly, but when we get out there today, I'll go ahead and see some adjustment and changes that we'll have to do. So create that, save that. Once you save it, it says, hey, the elevation is actually this, whatever elevation we are on the DEM, and we can see that we've got a decent amount. I always double check these numbers. I set it at 200. This is my working altitude between each of the waypoints. You can see that. My circle down height is going to stay at 374 when coming into the circle, and then transition at 200. I always want to just double check these numbers, make sure it's good to go. Close that, and my flight plan is saved. So after we get our flight plan ready, like I said, in between, we can do a lot of things in between. We can do dynamic tracking, we can adjust, we can move the camera around, we can take pictures while the aircraft is just carrying that payload or camera, and then make some adjustments during that time. So at any other time, we can hit return to home if we need to end the flight, and it will then come right to the same areas in which I designate. So this is initially pre-flight planning, but let's go out to the field and take a look at actually flying the aircraft under this flight plan, and then what I do to set things up.